Good morning. This is the BLAINSWORLD webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you get more information, listen to previous shows at our website, which is behind me, blainsworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio here in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce you to my guest tonight, and he is a local Asheville author, Moe Davis. And Moe, thanks for being my guest today. You can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So give him a big
Thank you,
wave.
Blaine. I appreciate you having me.
Okay, well, give him a big wave. Say hello to everybody.
Hello.
Great. That's Moe Davis. I should mention to you that Moe is born and raised in Shelby, North Carolina. And he graduated from Appalachian State University with a degree in criminal justice and worked in law enforcement training in the North Carolina Department of Justice before venturing onto law school in North Carolina Central University. He's been a member of the North Carolina Bar Association since 1983, the same year he joined the U.S. Air Force. He is best known for having served as chief prosecutor for the terrorism trials in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. After 2 years, he was the head of the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division at the Congressional Research Service. He was also a law professor at the Howard University School of Law and administrative law judge at the U.S. Department of Justice, or Labor, excuse me. He's written for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, NPR, and now BLAINSWORLD. Mo, you made the big time. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Now living in Asheville, he enjoys writing, having completed a historical novel set in the area. We'll be talking about this beautiful book called Sovereign Oaks. And so the question I always ask, first when I have a guest on, is so you grew up in North Carolina. Did you always know, I guess you wanted to be, first of all, an author? Did you, as a kid, did you know you wanted to be a writer?
No, definitely. My ambition as a kid was to be a professional wrestler. So
Okay.
writing was pretty far off from that.
So that's a professional wrestler. So what got you out of professional wrestling?
One of my early memories of coming to Asheville was coming here to see Andre the Giant.
I remember Andre the Giant, sure.
Yeah.
And
when I was in high school, I graduated in the bottom third of my class from Shelby High School. And didn't really take academics very seriously, but I love professional wrestling. There was one of my classmates, it used to be Jim Crockett Promotions before, you had the, World Championship Wrestling, and his uncle was Jim Crockett. And so that was my dream, was to grow up to be a professional wrestler.
Did you wrestle in high school?
I did.
Okay. What was your weight?
It was funny because all the other guys would be sweating and running and trying. I was in the heavyweight class, so weight was not an object.
Okay, because you don't seem like a big guy, excepting you. How tall are you?
I used to be 6'3". I haven't measured lately. I probably shrunk a bit. But
okay, well, exactly. That's when I stopped going to my doctor when he said I lost an inch. I was annoyed.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised though. You're talking about high school wrestling, so you said it wasn't hard to make weight. I'm surprised they didn't have you drop down to like 158 or something. If they did,
I passed 158 in about the second grade. So.
No, but it's criminal how coaches would do that, right? They'd have they need somebody to lower weight, and one guy was stuck. But you heavyweight, you can make it. But so what got you away from that dream? So you wrestled in high school, that was cool. Then what happened?
Well, I had a girlfriend in high school, and she was going to college at going to go to college at Appalachian State, and I figured I wasn't going to let her go alone, and so that's why I applied to go to college. And after my freshman year back in Shelby, we used to have a synthetic fiber plant there called Celanese. And that summer of my freshman year, they hired a bunch of college students so they could give their full-time employees time off.
Sure.
And I went for the interview. I said, I'll take the dirtiest, nastiest job you've got, thinking that'd make a good impression and not realizing they'd actually give it to me. So I worked in a place called the Salt Baths, where I took 3 shirts to work every night because every break we took, I'd put on a dry shirt because it was just hotter than hell. And we worked swing shifts. So about the time I'd get used to sleeping at a particular time, the next week And the guys I worked with had done that for, 20 or 30 years. And that was that experience that summer convinced me that maybe I should take academics a little more seriously than I had been.
Well, great story. And that's when you decided you didn't want to work for that company. Is that correct? After one summer?
Yeah, I don't know if you ever worked swing shifts, but for 3 months it was tolerable. I can't imagine spending a career changing your sleep pattern every week.
And I get used to it, I guess, somehow. So you then went to college. What was your major in college?
It was criminal justice.
Okay. And at that point in time, that's what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Well, it is. I was actually, when I was at Appalachian State I went there, I graduated high school in 76. So I was at App State from 76 to 80. Watauga County was a dry county. So you had to go to Blowing Rock to drink. And so on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night after midnight, probably every third or fourth car coming from Blowing Rock had a drunk driver behind the wheel. And there was no bail bondsman in Boone. So a friend of my father was a bail bondsman in Shelby. And when I was at home on a break, he said, "Hey, you go to school up at Appalachian State, you ought to think about being a bail bondsman." So while I was going to school and getting my degree in criminal justice, I moonlighted as the only bail bondsman in Watauga County, and did that throughout college and thought about staying on and continuing to do it. The only problem is nobody gets arrested between 9 and 5. It was always 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And about 1 out of 20 wouldn't show up for court, and you had to go find them and take them back to the sheriff. And they were not particularly pleased with that. So I realized that probably wasn't going to be a good career path for me.
Well, it's very cool. I have to tell you, you are definitely the first bail bondsman I've ever interviewed on air, or one time bail bondsman, but you did it for all throughout college. You were bail bondsman?
Yeah, for about, I guess, the last 3 years of my sophomore through senior year, I did. Now, I was the only one in town. So and most of them were college kids. They'd coming back from Blowing Rock. I don't know what it is now. Back then, it was $500 bond, and no college kid had $500 on them at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I got 15%. So I got $75 a pop to go get folks out of jail.
Okay, not bad. Interesting job, interesting background. But I see how it ties into then what you eventually became. So you graduated college and then you went into the service then?
Well, I went to law school after
Oh,
I'd worked for Rufus Edmondson. He was the attorney general. I worked in law enforcement training for about 6 months between college and law school. And then during law school, I was the most unlikely person to join the military. My older brother went to the Citadel, and he was the military type, and I was, like I said, I want to be a professional wrestler. But my dad was a 100% disabled veteran from World War II. And actually, my earliest memories of Asheville are my dad saying, "Hop in the car, we're going up to O-Team." We'd come up here for him to go to his appointments at the VA hospital, which is about a mile from where I'm sitting and where I go now to get my health care. But my dad died right after I graduated law school. I took the North Carolina bar exam. I got my results. I think he was more proud of that than I was. And a week later, he had a heart attack and died.
oh, but
And
what a
I
great
think I
story
kind of felt
though.
like I owed it to him. He never complained about leaving North Carolina as a healthy young man and coming back home 100% disabled. He was really proud of having served. And I think just the timing of it, him dying, and I kind of felt like I owed it to him, and I was going to join up and do 4 years. Um, they told me I was going to go to Cocoa Beach, Florida, which didn't hurt. So I thought I'd go to Florida, get 4 years of experience and then come back home to North Carolina. And then 4 years turned into 25 years. And it
Well,
was
so your background was kind of interesting. So you did it opposite a lot of other people. So you went to law school first, right?
right,
After college, finished your law school, then you went into the service?
right.
Yeah. And so what
Yeah,
was
there's,
what
yeah,
was
there's
your
another
reason?
program, which I wasn't smart enough to figure this out. The Air Force sends about, the numbers vary, but 10, 15, 20 officers a year get selected to go to law school. And the Air Force pays for it. You get your regular pay. It counts towards retirement. So a really good deal. But I didn't find out about that until
Okay.
after I joined, and they did pay for me to go back to law to get advanced degrees at called a Master's of Law at George Washington University up in D.C. and the Army has a school down at the University of Virginia. So they did pay for 2 advanced degrees after that.
By the way, if anybody's listening, Mo, you're giving really good advice to folks, and that is they should check out what's available in terms of whatever branch of the service and take advantage of it, because that's a lot of people probably don't know, or unfortunately they don't know it in your case until after the fact. It's too bad nobody told you before the fact. It also ties into, Mo, I'm a little concerned, as perhaps you are, is I hope these programs continue, in the future.
I do too. You mentioned in the intro, I was on the faculty at Howard University at the law school for 4 years, and I encouraged a number of my students to consider a career in the military. I mean, it's not for everybody. For me, it just turned out to be a great fit, and I wish I was young enough to do it again. But I encouraged a lot of young folks to join the military, and under the current administration, I don't know that I would do that because I'm not sure what they're going to call upon the military to do.
Yeah, and not that I want to talk a lot about politics with you, but since you brought it up, in terms of not only what's going to happen in the military, Mo, but my real concern, and you wrote about it on Facebook, I think yesterday or today, is what's going to happen to veterans.
Right.
I just don't get it. Anyway, it's a sad happening, but let's get away from that. So,
well, I think for veterans, I mean, I think there's been this push, on the Republican side, Chuck Edwards and Trump and in that group to every opportunity to find a way to make a buck. And so I think they're going to try to do to the VA hospital, which the one here in Asheville is one of the best in the country. I mean, my dad got great care there years ago, and I get great care there now. But I think they want to privatize it. They want to do they want to do to the VA hospital what Mission has gone through, going from a public to a for-profit hospital. So
I get a chill as you're talking about it, because one of the reasons we moved to Asheville is Mission, the best hospital out there, and you want to go where you have a good hospital. And I wouldn't say it's up there in that category to the standpoint, it's just a shame what's happened there. But let's get away from there a little bit. So you talk about then you got into service, and how do you eventually, which is kind of a cool thing to have done, become a chief prosecutor of all things terrorism? How'd that happen?
It was kind of out of the blue. After 9/11, at the time 9/11 happened, I was in Montgomery, Alabama. I was the deputy commandant of the Air Force JAG School, which is located at Maxwell Air Force Base. Not long after that, there was a call went out through all the services to all the JAG Corps, to the military, looking for people to staff up the military commissions that President Bush created. So they were looking for judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, all the pieces that are required to put together this criminal justice system. And so at the time, I volunteered to be the chief defense counsel because, number one, I don't know if you remember, right after 9/11, the country was red hot, and
Sure.
I didn't think anyone would want the job. And I thought it was important that somebody do it and do it right. It's like John Adams, he defended the British, the Boston Massacre, because he thought it was important. In World War II, you had the Nazi saboteurs that were prosecuted in military commissions. They were defended by Colonel Kenneth Royal from North Carolina. So I volunteered to be the chief defense counsel. I didn't get picked. A friend of mine did, Will Gunn. Will was an Air Force Academy grad, Harvard Law School, White House fellow. I couldn't argue with the selection. So I just kind of forgot about it until 2005, and the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force called and said, the chief prosecutor has been relieved of duty. We're looking for someone to fill the job. Would you consider doing it? My wife and I, at that point, we just moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Had been there about 5 months at the time, and I flew to Washington and met with the general counsel for the Department of Defense, and they picked me for the job, and I did that for the next little over 2 years.
Okay, that must have been some job to have had.
It was. I mean, I can't believe we're sitting here in 2025 and
Right.
we're still talking about Guantanamo Bay in the present tense. But yeah, it was, for an attorney, it's not one of those things you say it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity, because most attorneys don't get that opportunity in a lifetime. So it was, I had a great group of folks I worked with, and who really were committed to try to do justice and make this a credible process that the country could be proud of.
You
I
know,
remember,
yeah, I'm sorry.
no, I remember my first staff meeting. I told the members of the prosecution team that people my age, we look back at Nuremberg, after World War II, and we look back with pride that at the end of the war we didn't take the Nazis out and shoot them. We gave them trials, and some were
Right.
executed and some were acquitted. And I said, we're going to do this in a way that our grandkids will look back at Guantanamo the way we look back at Nuremberg, and never imagined that 20 years later this would still be an ongoing issue.
And as you talk about it being an ongoing issue, it kind of scares me too, in that all of a sudden now we're getting rid of judges. We're getting rid of, the whole criminal justice system. It worked, it seemed in certain respects very well. And all of a sudden there's going to be tomorrow, there's going to be not tomorrow, but sometime down the road, there could be, virtually no criminal justice system, and no judges, cutting judges, cutting federal employees. I don't get
Yeah,
it, but
it's strange times we're living in.
really strange. So you did that. It's interesting, your trajectory of what you did. So you did that for 2 years. What happened after that?
Well, I ended up resigning. Towards the end, there was a change out in the folks that were above me. My policy had been we weren't going to use any evidence that was obtained by torture,
Hmm.
which I couldn't say the word torture back then. We came up with words to disguise, make it to sanitize what we were doing. So we couldn't call it torture. It was called enhanced interrogation techniques.
Right.
And that's like some of the detainees tried to kill themselves, and I couldn't say suicide. It was called self-injurious behavior.
Well, you were told you couldn't do that?
Yeah, but I was towards the end there. I was told that evidence that I wasn't using, that we had to use it, and I refused to do it and quit. So that ended my military career. Came to an end shortly thereafter.
So, I mean, that's on your part, pretty gutsy move, because that was, you've done it in pretty probably good career path, I've become a, the chief prosecutor. And all of a sudden, what was this, 2007, give or take? When was this?
Yes,
So 2007, after being in the military for how many years?
it had been 24 at that point.
So now you no longer have that job. Did you quit the service as well?
It was a few months later. I left that job in October of 2007. I officially retired October of 2008. The last few months I was, I had built up a bunch of vacation time.
Right.
But for the last several months, I was the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force moved me over to be the Director of the Air Force Judiciary. And so I did that for about the last 6 or 8 months, and then went
So
on
now,
terminal leave.
2008, whenever all of a sudden after a career in the military, you find yourself without a job. That's when you started teaching?
Well, no, after that, I was hired to be the head of the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division at Congressional Research Service.
Okay.
I mean, my official title was Senior Specialist in National Security for the 111th Congress, but I ran the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division at CRS.
Interesting job for a kid from Western North Carolina. It was
Oh,
about a third of high school, get to be here. How long did you do that for?
I did that for a little over a year. It's really interesting. It was a great job. I mean, CRS, Congressional Research Service, is one of those little known government agencies, but it's kind of like a nonpartisan think tank for Congress. If a member of Congress wants to research on any topic, they can, CRS has, like my division, I had about 110 people in my division. Probably 90% of them were PhDs in some of the most esoteric topics you can think of. It was fun to come into work in the morning and just get a cup of coffee and walk around and talk to folks, because they each had their niche, and that was their life. And So I did that for about a year. And then unfortunately, if you recall, 2009, Barack Obama won. January took office. First thing he signed was actually the Lilly Ledbetter Act.
Right.
The second thing he signed right after that was the order to close Guantanamo. So I thought, life for me was looking pretty good. I was a senior executive in the federal government. Guantanamo is closing. By the fall, he began to backpedal. So in November of 2009, it's the only time I've written a bunch of op-eds. I write for the Citizen Times about once a month now, but uh, it's the only time I ever wrote an op-eds that got picked up by the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal on the same day. And that was Veterans Day of 2009. And both of them were critical of the Obama administration for not closing Guantanamo. And, Veterans Day was a holiday. So the next day I went to work and I got called in and got fired for writing the
Oh,
op-eds.
but by the way, we were talking off the air, Mo, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, self, this is again your book, and even a way to write it. It's just a suggestion, my friend, if I can, write just a series of op-eds, because you write them well, but I'd love to see all those in a compilation, as you write them,
Right.
the event, almost the way to write them as an op-ed. Here's Mo on his stance on whatever, but I think it'd be fascinating. So that's something you get fired for writing an op-ed.
Right.
It seems it's speaking to you, it's kind of interesting. You've gone through a bunch of jobs here. In a relatively short period of time. Did
Right.
things get better for you after 2009?
Well, actually, I was on unemployment for a while because you remember I resigned as chief
Right.
prosecutor, which really pissed off the Republicans. And then I got fired for writing the op-ed that was critical of President Obama, which really pissed off the Democrats. So when you're in DC and you pissed off both the Republicans and the Democrats, finding a job is not easy. So I was on
But
unemployment.
I was going to say something different though, where it says that's when you're doing something right, that everybody's angry with you. So yeah, I can imagine that, finding a job after being out of a job. So
Well, it was really interesting. Like I said, I was on unemployment uh, for a while, but I don't know if you remember Vernon Jordan, civil rights
sure.
leader.
Yeah, right.
One day out of the blue, I get a call from this lady who said, "I'm Vernon Jordan's administrative assistant. He'd like to meet with you." And so I go downtown to his office at a big law firm, and he calls me in. And he said, "Look, I heard what happened to you. You did the right thing. I'm proud of you for doing it. What can I do to help?" And I said, "Well, I can't find a job." And he picked up the phone and called the dean of the law school at Howard University, which Mr. Jordan happened to be on the board of trustees.
Nice
And
connection.
I spent the next 4 years at Howard University teaching at the law school.
Okay, did you
So
enjoy that?
I did. It was a lot of fun. I mean, you taught. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's a
loved
lot of
it.
it was, yeah, every day. All these kids came in, they're fired up, they're going to change the world. By the third year, they're kind of worn down, but teaching was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my time at Howard.
Because you can see, even talking to me, you'd be an excellent teacher. I mean, wealth of knowledge, variety of fields. So you did that for a couple of years, 4 years. You were full time there?
I was,
Okay, that
yes.
was kind of cool. So how come you're not still there?
Well, I did, it's one of those things, when I was practicing
Right,
law, teaching seemed like it would be a lot of fun.
right.
And then after teaching for a few years, it seemed like it would be fun to practice. And so I applied to be a judge and was hired at the Department of Labor, which interestingly, the chief judge that hired me had been a military attorney who was a judge in one of the cases where I testified at Guantanamo uh, for the defense. And so he had retired and became chief judge for the Department of Labor and hired me there. So for my last 5 years, I was a judge at the Department of Labor, which again was a great job. I really enjoyed that as well.
And what's such a shame, Mo, as I read, you know it much better than I do, but all these judgeships are up in the air now, or somebody
Right.
has the great idea you're going to get rid of judges. I don't get it. So we'll fast forward then now to all of a sudden you become a writer. So this is a really cool story again. Remembering your high school days, bottom third of the class, never written, I guess you were at law school, you did a lot of writing. But what made you decide to become a writer?
Well, after my wife and I, I tell you one thing, I didn't appreciate Western North Carolina, having grown up around here, until I joined the military and saw the rest of the world. And that's when I knew that this is where I wanted to be. So we moved here in 2019, right after, or we actually left on Memorial Day to drive down. And for the next several months, I was working as a contract employee for the Department of Labor, writing opinions for the other judges. And then when the budget got held up, that program got suspended and it kept dragging on. So I just was looking for something to do. And I had some story, some things in mind. The book, there are 4 parts to the book I wrote. The first 3 are based on historical events that took place within walking distance of where I'm sitting that I never knew about. And I thought they were really interesting events. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind. The 4th part is a fictional story, but it's based on a couple. When I was the chief prosecutor at Guantanamo, I got to meet with the folks from the CIA that had tortured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other detainees that were in CIA custody. And in my mind, I had this picture of what they were going to be like. I don't know if you remember the show 24 with Kiefer
Oh,
Sutherland.
sure. Yeah.
I thought they were going to be like, and these 2 guys walk in and they could have been your uncle or the guy down the street. And what was extraordinary was how ordinary they were. And that had always stuck with me. So the 4th part of the book is about this what apparently ordinary couple that had an extraordinary background that follows them to Asheville after they retire. So, when my work with the Department of Labor got put on hold because of the budget stuff, and what I ended up doing, one thing since I've retired, I'm in hike a lot, I bike a lot. So what I would do when the weather was bad, I'd come down to my office and write, and that's what led to the book.
And talk about the writing process, Mo. I'm always interested to speak to writers in terms of, are you the kind of guy who like gets up every morning at 7 o'clock and writes for 5 hours straight, or how do you go about writing?
It really depends. I mean, like I said, I kind of had this general framework of how these pieces would fit together. I didn't script it out in detail. It was more free form. But there were times I'd come down here right after, pretty early in the morning. And once you get into it, I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was, for me, I found marketing the book is not fun. Writing the book was fun. And there were times where you just get lost in it. I would just get on a roll, and next thing you know, it's dinner time. And it's like, where in the hell did the time go?
Now, when you wrote the book, did you write it, you used the word processor, or are you one of the guys who still write longhand?
No, I did it on using Microsoft Word on a laptop, and it worked well for me.
Because I can't believe, there are guys who still write out longhand,
Right.
I don't know about you. My problem, I can't even read my writing, let alone write out longhand. How
Yeah.
long did it take you to write the book?
God, it probably close to a year. Like I said, it was mainly if the weather was nice and I could go hiking or biking or, uh, go drink beer with my buddies or whatever, I would do that. So it's kind of like the rainy days and the snowy days that I'd come down here and write. So, there'd be weeks at a time I didn't do anything on it, and there'd be other weeks where I might do 4 or 5 days.
Now,
But eventually,
yeah,
I may have mentioned one of the head of the department at Howard at the law school that I was in is a literary agent in addition to being a law professor. And so I'd been talking with her about the book. And, she was telling me that, my goal was to finish it by the fall of 2024.
right.
And she said, well, if you do and everything goes perfectly, it might make it into print by 2026. Because it is a long, cumbersome process with a traditional publisher getting a book published. And I guess what Hurricane Helene is what really accelerated my effort. The book it starts and ends with an old Cherokee proverb that says everything in nature is connected. If you harm one thing, you harm everything. So, the book, all parts of it really focus on rivers and trees and wildlife and those things and how they connect. And so when Hurricane Helene hit, I had this notion that if I could hurry up and get the book out, I could use it as a vehicle to raise money to help with hurricane relief. So my, you know, my, I don't, my plan is to donate 100% of whatever I make on the book to hurricane relief efforts. So, so far I've designated Manna Food Bank,
Very nice.
Habitat for Humanity here in Asheville, World Central Kitchen, and Beloved Asheville, because those are groups that have worked with feeding people, with housing people. And so, every penny I'm getting from the book is going to those organizations to help support their hurricane relief efforts.
By the way, this person you mentioned who encouraged you to do this, is she still around?
She is. She's still teaching at Howard.
And can we give a shout out that person's name? I don't know if we mentioned it before. Can we mention her name?
Yeah, Shoshana Crichton. She was the head of the department I was in. A really nice lady. And, at the time I was working there, I knew she was, I didn't really have an interest in literature, but I knew that was, what she did as well as teaching at the school.
By the way, if she's listening, and I hope she will, or hopefully, Mo, you'll send her a copy of this interview. I'd love to share it with you. I'd like to thank her for encouraging you to get this writing career off the ground, which leads me to another question, Mo, and that is, so you have the first book out of the way. We knocked the first one out. Right. Is there a second book down the road?
Yeah, I've actually started. I've got like the first 1,500 words written. And what really inspired the second part is it picks up where this first book leaves off. So you'll end up seeing a lot of the same characters that this one ends with. But what really kind of inspired it was Hurricane Helene. I live, and a lot of the book takes place, like I said, within walking distance of where I'm sitting. And I live kind of at the intersection of the Swannanoa River and Bull Creek. And some really interesting history happened right here in this area. But when Hurricane Helene hit the development where I live, we were landlocked for a couple of days because Old Farm School Road, is right on the Swannanoa River. So if you came out of our development, if you turned left or right, you go about 100 yards and you hit 10 feet of water. And so it occurred to me, in those early days, everybody here was, we didn't have power, we didn't have water, we didn't have internet, but everybody was chipping in and helping each other. We got to meet, there are folks that I saw in passing, in the neighborhood that actually got to meet. Right. And it was a very cooperative and collegial, and everybody, so the thought occurred to me, what would have happened if instead of 2 days, it was 2 weeks? And we were stuck here. Would that cooperation turn to competition? And so that's kind of my thought for the second book is picking up where this first book leaves off here in the neighborhood in the wake of Hurricane Helene, and then tying it in with the flood of 1916 would be kind of the historical connection, because up until a few months ago, everybody thought the flood of 1916 was the biggest calamity to hit this area, and then Helene kind of knocked it down a peg.
And so I have to ask you one final question, Mo, and that is, I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but I guess I first heard about you when you were running for Congress, and I guess I'll ask 2 questions. So number one, what gave you the idea to run for Congress?
Yeah, like I said, we moved here in the summer of 2019.
Right.
Where I'm sitting, if you recall, this area got gerrymandered, and Asheville got split down the middle to dilute the Democratic vote. So literally where I'm sitting right now was in the Patrick McHenry district. rather than the Mark Meadows district. So I had no notion of running against Patrick McHenry.
Sure.
In November of that year, you may recall the state Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional under our state constitution to have purposely split. Because you remember, like UNC Asheville, depending on which side of the road you're on, you could be in one dorm, you're in one district, and the other side of the road, you're in a different district. So when they put the district back together, it put where I'm sitting in the Mark Meadows district. And I was never a fan of Mark Meadows. And I just know we can do better. And so it was November. A lot other folks were already running, and I just didn't feel like they really had a realistic opportunity to take on a Mark Meadows. And so I decided to jump in and see what happened. And then the primary was a lot of fun. I was worried, since I was late getting into the race on how it was going to go, but I ended up doing well, winning the primary. And I thought, great, because, the Republicans, if you may recall, they ended up in a runoff because nobody got over 30%. And I thought, well, they're fighting each other. I can be out in the district talking to veterans and then the week after is when all of a sudden COVID made headlines and just totally changed the equation. It made campaigning, extraordinarily difficult if you took COVID seriously.
Do you ever see yourself running for office again?
I don't know. If I thought that the math could work, I'm still, I think we've gone from Mark Meadows to Madison Cawthorn to Chuck Edwards. I just know that Western North Carolina can do better. And if I thought there was a chance that's my only regret with losing. Personally, it's worked out great for me. I'm hiking and biking and drinking beer and doing things I couldn't do if I'd won. But it hurts to see Western North Carolina lagging behind. So if I thought I could make the math work, I'd do it. But I'm just not sure that's doable at this point.
As you're talking, Mo, I'm thinking of so many cheap jokes that I won't use. About you could still be drinking beer and running for office and being a congressman. I won't go there, But anyway, we'll let you know. Not that it matters, but you did have my vote. You'd have my vote again if you ever ran. So I want to thank you for having taken the initiative to do so. I'd also we're up against clock, so I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of Blaine's World webcast. And I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. And hopefully we'll bump into each other one of these days down the road.
Sounds good. Let's get a beer.
Okay, I'm thinking the same thing. No, that'd be great. Thanks, man.